Hey guys. So I've always wanted to start a talk like this, but if you were an alien from outer space, normal beginning to a talk, and you came to Earth to spend time with humans, what would you think humans care about? You don't know anything about these people, these species you've come to visit, but you look around, you drop in on a high school and you look around, and what would you think that people care most about? Would it be clothes? Would it be Doritos? And would it be Fortnite? Would it be TikTok, memes? What if you're watching this and you're with people, or even if you're not, yell out a couple things. What do you think people? What do you think aliens would look at us and say these people care about what? Well, one of the things that I really think is a no-brainer that they'd look around and say it looks like they care about sex. And here's what I mean. If you look at any teenage comedy movie, it's about sex. If you look at shows on Netflix that are made for you, for teenagers and for adults too, they're sexual by nature. If you look at a lot of songs and listen to the lyrics, they refer to all kinds of sexual things. And depending on who you're around during the day, you might even hear a lot of conversations from other people talking about sex, even if it's not conversations you necessarily want to be a part of. There's a lot of jokes with the punchlines about sex. There's some of the juiciest gossip is about, who's hooking up with who. And if you're an alien visiting Earth, you probably end up thinking sex is a pretty big deal to people here because it's just everywhere we look. And then at the same time, you might also hear this message that sex is not a big deal. Here's what I mean. Even though you're surrounded by messages and images and conversations about sex, most of them add up to a single idea, and that's it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Maybe you've heard something like sex isn't a big deal. Everybody's having sex, which, by the way, statistically is not true. Or a hookup is totally casual, or it's just harmless fun, or sex is just part of being an adult. It's part of growing up. And unless you live under a rock, you've heard something like that from movies, TV, music, and conversations at school. In fact, some of you may even get these messages from people closest to you, maybe some good friends or family. And maybe you've wondered if everybody in your world tends to agree that sex isn't a big deal. Why does it seem like certain adults in your life, maybe adults from church or, from a Christian context, might say, no, it does matter. Why do they act like it matters so much? And if everybody's having sex and acting like it's no big deal, why does it seem like people care about it so much? Those are good questions. You're not wrong to ask them. So as we talk about them today, I want to start with just one simple idea, and that's this. Sex is treated as casual, but it's much more important than we give it credit for being. So, for example, some ways that sex seems like it's actually a pretty big deal. Breakups often hurt worse and hurt longer when sex has been a part of them. After a breakup, people can talk about this, feeling numb or feeling like they've lost something they can never get back. And maybe even a relationship in some cases can feel like it haunts a person, like it's something they carry with them. And those feelings intensify when sex is part of the relationship because sex is powerful. And even if sex was handled casually, even if the couple didn't pretend like it was a very big deal, it doesn't mean it wasn't. It doesn't mean it was actually casual, and it makes the pain worse when the relationship doesn't work out if sex was part of it. Another reason I think sex is more powerful than sometimes we give it credit for is cheating is a big deal, especially if you're married. Think about it. If sex wasn't a big deal, then why would people care so much when cheating happens in a relationship? It's because people get hurt and upset and angry most when people cheat on them because sex is powerful. Or here's another example. When we hear about someone being sexually abused or being a sexual abuser, that raises something in us that that is deeper than, I mean, obviously we care if someone's just being abused, but sexual abuse seems worse, right? It bothers us, and it should. It's more upsetting. And I'm not trying to get all dark on, just for the sake of that. I get it. I'm not saying sex is bad and you're going to die if you have sex or anything like that. I'm just saying it's more powerful than sometimes we give it credit for. It's more powerful than sometimes we think. And the reality is that some things God made are just more powerful than other things. I mean, an elephant is more powerful than a cricket, and a tornado is more powerful than a rainstorm. And sex is more powerful than dating or than having a crush or than even making out. So then why? Why does it matter? That's what we want to talk about today. The passage we're going to look at is in 1 Corinthians. It's in the New Testament. It's a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote. And if you don't know Paul, he's an important guy for the New Testament. He wrote a lot of it. He wrote these letters to churches that he had helped plant, that he had helped start. And the thing with these letters is they were basically telling people, what does it look like to be a Jesus follower? What does it look like to be a Christian? Because this was a new thing. And if you looked around, you couldn't say, oh, that guy's been a Christian for a while, I should follow his example, because everyone was kind of starting from square one. So the letter we're looking at was one that Paul sent to a city named Corinth. That's why it's called Corinthians. So we know that this ancient city was really famous for bad behavior. And in this particular passage, Paul talks about them, about sexuality in their bodies, which might have meant that Paul knew about something that needed to be addressed. So maybe they were doing something that they shouldn't be. And Paul was saying, hey, let me talk about that. And so here's how he starts. He says, run from sexual sin. And of course, he starts that way. Of course, he's going to talk about sex right away. And of course, he's going to have an extreme response, right? In fact, some translations say flee, which feels even stronger, doesn't it? A little more intense. But I want to point out a specific word here, and I don't want you to miss it. It says sin, sexual sin. Some translations say sexual not immortality, that's different, immorality. And Paul isn't saying sex is a bad thing here. In fact, like we said last week, God made sex. Paul's just saying sexual immorality, or sex outside of the way that God created it to be. That's a bad thing. And I think what he says next is interesting. He says, no other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. To which his audience may have been like, what do you mean affects the body? Like in a good way or a bad way? So Paul clarifies. He says, for sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. It's a sin against your own body. And that's kind of a twist and maybe surprising to hear. And maybe you're wondering, what does that even mean? If you were here for part one of the series, we talked about how sexual activity is a big deal because it involves the way that we treat other people, and it affects their future. It affects our future and it affects their future. But Paul is going in further. Paul's basically saying that when we take steps with someone sexually, you're allowing them to affect your heart, your emotions, your future, your reputation, your conscience. And by the way, that's how sex was made to work. From the very beginning, God designed it to bond two married people, to involve their hearts, their emotions, and their futures. Sex was made to have an impact on someone's life. In other words, sex was made to matter. And Paul's pointing out that even when we act like it doesn't, even when we treat sex casually, even when we have sex outside of God's design, it will still impact us. And I think that's why Paul started this section by saying, hey, run, flee, to a group of people who were used to treating sex as something that they ran toward, not away from. He was opening their eyes, and maybe he's opening ours too, to the fact that sex has a powerful effect on us, whether we can see it right now or not. He's basically saying, hey, sex was made to matter. So treat sex like it matters. You know, it's kind of like this. It's kind of like fire. And when I was a kid, I used to love fire. Not, maybe not in an overly crazy way, but I remember when the local Pizza Hut lit on fire, and I went and videotaped in the middle of the night when I saw, I was in high school then, and because I was like, oh my gosh, this building's on fire. And but maybe more on a personal note, and in my backyard there was this anthill, and I heard you could burn anthills, so I poured gasoline on it and I lit it. And guys, I'm not joking when I say the flame was as tall as I was, and I was just kind of standing there in my backyard like, should I get a hose? I maybe needed more supervision as a kid. Maybe I do still today. But the thing is about flame and about fire is that it can be good and it can be a tool. But, you know, you shouldn't play with fire. And hopefully there's some adults in your life who, if you're playing with fire, they're like, listen, I'm going to step in. Don't do that. Don't use fire in certain ways, because they don't want you to get burned. But that's not all. Not only can it hurt you, it can hurt people around you. The adults who would step in, when I would step in now and say, hey, stop. I don't want you to get hurt, but I don't want people around you or things around you to get hurt either. And I think adults sometimes, if you've experienced that, it's because people know how quickly fire can get out of hand. And fire is a good thing. Fire can keep us warm. Fire can bring us together. Fire can create memories, but only if it's kept in its proper place. When we misuse fire, when we don't respect it or honor it, it can have terrible consequences. This specific picture is part of an article entitled Man Tries to Kill Spider and Ends Up Burning His House Down from Time Magazine. I just found it while I was surfing around, and this article goes on to explain how a guy tried to kill a spider by, lighting a flame and then spraying spray paint through the flame at the spider, and then things just went downhill from there. And it's because maybe he didn't understand or believe in the power of fire, and it had some pretty bad consequences. And that's basically what Paul is saying to the people in the town of Corinth who write this letter. It seems like a harmless match or candle, and it seems fun, but it has the potential to do a lot of damage. So for you, I'd invite you to not see sex as a casual thing, because it's not. Even if you make it that way, it doesn't mean the other person will. So run away from that type of casual thinking. See it as something that matters for both you and the other person, because treating sex like it doesn't matter is similar to playing with fire. Paul, at the end of his verse, adds this exclamation point to what he's already said. He adds this last statement. He says, hey, don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who lives in you and was given to you by God? Now, this is a rhetorical question, meaning he didn't expect them to answer, because he figured they already knew the answer. And it was, yeah, your body, which was given to you by God, was meant to belong to God. He doesn't treat it casually. So you shouldn't either. And in the same way, don't allow someone else to view your body casually, or to treat you or your body casually, for that matter. Some of you are currently experiencing the negative impacts of someone else's casual approach to sex. Maybe your family life has been broken up because of an affair. Maybe you know people who have been affected by an STD or an unplanned pregnancy, or maybe you've seen a friend struggle with regret or heartache because of a previous relationship. And it seemed casual at the time, but it broke them up eventually. And I know people too, and I wish I could go back and tell those people, hey, sex was made to matter. And I wish I could get them to believe it, because that's hard. But do you believe it? So here's the thing about sexual relationships in high school, and not just sex, but all the things that lead up to sex. these relationships are not permanent. And I know we act like they're permanent. We can feel like they're permanent. We can have some really strong emotions. I've been there. But in reality, there's no shared bank accounts, no shared last name, no shared housing, and no shared legal standing. There's no shared promise, like no covenant promise. And we've all seen couples break up who we thought would be together forever. In high school, I thought Kyle and Anna would be together forever. They were awesome. I liked both of them individually and together. Oh man, they're a power couple, but they broke up. And that's just a normal part of life right now. This doesn't mean relationships won't eventually become permanent. They just aren't permanent right now. And by having sex, two people are allowing their physical, emotional, and spiritual selves to become connected in a way that was meant to be permanent. Because sex is so powerful, the emotions and scars that remain after couples break up can be devastating. And sometimes you don't even realize it until a couple years down the road. In essence, what was intended to be powerfully good in marriage becomes powerfully harmful when it's made casual. Remember how Paul starts that verse that we read? He said, run. Well, when you run away from something, you have to run towards something else. So when it comes to all things sex related, the same is true. It's not just about getting further away from the things that could negatively impact your future with someone else. It's about getting closer to something else. The opposite of sexual immorality is sexual integrity. Now, integrity is a word people use a lot and don't always define. It's if a building has good structural integrity, it means all of the parts of the building are working together. They're integrated in a way that will make that building stand strong. And if you have sexual integrity, it means that the sexual parts of you, not just physical parts, but like your emotional and spiritual, your mental, they're just working well with the rest of you. It means that it's integrated well with your beliefs and values. And integrity means, being strong and honorable and honest and trustworthy. And sexual integrity is just deciding to be all those things in your sex life. So as for you, the things that have negative effects, sexual immorality, run away from those things and run towards the things that have positive effects. So sexual integrity. Run from letting culture and music and movies define what kind of person you're going to be or what does or doesn't matter in your life. Run from mindlessly watching or listening to or engaging with messages about sex that act like it's no big deal. Run from anyone from your life who blurs your view of sex by trying to convince you that it's no big deal. Instead, run toward being a person who honors others. Run toward being a person who is strong enough to say no to yourself or someone else. And run toward asking yourself, what's better for me, both now and in the future? Run toward asking yourself, what's better for other people, both now and in the future? And refuse to participate in anything that portrays sexual immorality as just this casual thing. Here's what's great about sexual integrity. It's always possible, whether you've had sex in the past or not. Integrity is about the kind of person you want to be now, not just how far you've gone in the past. But let me be super honest with you. This thing that I put on the screen a little while ago is true, I think. Sexual integrity is not normal. It's not how everybody in our culture acts. In your school or in your life and the lives of adults around you, sexual immorality is the norm. And I've seen it. I've seen it in my family members. I've seen it in people from church. It's the norm, even here, which is not a good thing. Sexual immorality is what happens when you don't think about it and don't plan for it. That's why you're going to need some intentionality. Because something that's important deserves a plan. Think about it. If you want to become an athlete, you plan your workouts, you figure out your diet. If you want to be wealthy, you plan your finances. And if you want to become a person of sexual integrity, even if it sounds weird, you got to plan how you're going to run from sexual immorality. You have to set some boundaries, avoid those tempting situations, and even get some accountability. Get some friends around you. Share some hard stuff. Remember, sex is powerful, but like we said, sex was made to matter. And we'd be crazy to think that we can just handle temptations on our own without a plan or without some help. So make a plan. As we kind of wrap up, I want you to imagine how your life would be different if you chose to treat sex like it matters. Maybe you're there. Maybe this would be a shift for you. Either way, I want to ask this question. Maybe even close your eyes, just pause for a second, think, what would you do differently now, today, this week, this month? What would you do differently? If you believe sex really matters, if you treat it like it really matters, what would you do differently now? What would you change about what you watch or what you listen to or what you talk about? What would you change about the things you think about? And then, like, fast forward in your mind 10 years. Think about how old you'll be in 10 years. It's crazy to think about. But what do you think at that age you would tell right now you? Would you tell yourself, thank you for making some really good decisions back then? It mattered. Or would you talk about regrets and say, man, I wish I would have done these things differently. I wish I would have had some restraint in these areas, some self-control. Listen, if sex really does matter, how will what you're doing now affect you then? Let me close this time prayer, and then you guys can have some discussion time. Dear God, thank you for who you are. Thank you for making sex, for making it a good thing. And thanks for making it to matter. I pray that we would use this good thing in the ways it was meant to be used, that you would give us self-control and restraint and wisdom in this area for each person listening to this. Bless our conversations that follow here. In your name, amen. Thank you for being here and enjoy your conversation.